Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. This is our weekly vulnerability analysis from the Virsec Security Labs. Joined as always by Satya Gupta, our founder and CTO. Hi, Satya. How are you this week?
Very good, really. Thank you so much. How are you doing?
Good, good. So January seems to not let up, and it looks like we're as busy as ever or busier with vulnerabilities. We've picked out our top 6 or 7 this week, but maybe you can share a little bit, Satya, about what you're seeing in terms of numbers, and then we'll do our analysis.
Absolutely. Let me share my screen here. So yeah, so this week we picked out, this week there was like a standard 500 vulnerabilities plus threshold was reached again. And as always, we are picking up only some high impact vulnerabilities. They could be high impact because they are affecting somebody's, they've got very large footprint, or they could have a very high CVSS score and a popular product, or they could be a vulnerability in the OS or hypervisor or some common library that gets folded into other pieces of code essentially.
So
So
500 seems to be about the new kind of normal baseline, if there is such a thing.
exactly, this is kind of this is the usual typical week, I guess I would say.
Yeah, you can get used to anything, I guess, but
Yes. And given we go from Monday to Sunday, and typically none of them get filed on the weekend. So it's really 5 days worth. So it's roughly averages about 100-ish odd vulnerabilities per day, effectively,
okay.
the work week.
Okay. So what
So
have we got on the list here?
yeah, absolutely. So we picked up these 6 that we think are important, 5 plus the one confused deputy attack that we're going to be talking about. The first one is in AirWave, which is a Aruba HPE company. The second one is a very popular monitoring solution called Nagios. And the third one is on PHP Fusion. It's a very common framework that people use to build their PHP code. A Microsoft Office remote code vulnerability. It's been picked because it has a very large footprint, and therefore people should really be aware that they need to upgrade. In IBM API Connect, there's a cross-path scripting capability that we'll be describing more. And then confused deputy of the week is Forti Deceptor. Forti is, of course, a VPN firewall product that has a big footprint in especially in the SMB space, essentially.
So we're seeing some new names, but remote code execution still is cropping up in at least half of these.
Absolutely. The command injection, of course, as you know, it can lead to remote code. So I would say, and CSRF is also allows, the attacker to run arbitrary code on the endpoint. So I would say, other than the cross-path scripting, everything here is a remote code execution vulnerability. So 5 out of 6, has the desired remote code execution threshold has been reached essentially.
Okay.
So let me describe my very first vulnerability. As we discussed, this is this affects the AirWave glass product made by Aruba, which is of course part of HPE. So one of the things that it does is that it basically aggregates these wireless network devices and controller switches. And most Fortune 1000 companies use it to control their wireless network in a single pane of glass, essentially. So it has the ability to inject stuff into the wireless networks of their clients. So a command injection vulnerability lets attacker gain control of the Aruba network. So it's like almost like a supply chain kind of an attack here.
Right.
A vulnerability in this product here would affect downstream users essentially.
So it could propagate to X number of users very, very quickly, potentially.
Yes. So, it's like one of those innocent bystander type situations. You simply become vulnerable because, some vulnerability that had a very large footprint in your organization is now out in the open.
Yeah,
So
and interesting, thinking on SolarWinds again and this, the lack of zero trust, I guess, or the fact that people receive trusted updates or they're using a trusted network, and assuming that's safe. And I guess that's a adjustment we all need to make to a certain extent.
Totally. And, this, as you rightly pointed out, it's about the trust. So you normally, when you deploy a product, especially meant to sort of control your very large footprint into your wireless networks and your network switches and all, a vulnerability in that can really reorient, your network and reposition it and allow an attacker to dwell in the network for a very long time. So that makes it really special in my mind.
Sure. Okay.
So as we can see here, there's a CBSS score of 9.8 associated with it, but fortunately there's no public exploit. So hopefully that's a little bit of a deterrent out there. People don't have to rush into this upgrading all of this software, but I would still recommend that, we do deploy, some sort of a in-memory protection so we can see, this is really a Java deserialization attack. So this is the kind of thing that Virsec's VSP platform would detect very easily. So that's something to think about here.
Okay.
My next vulnerability that I picked out is a Nagios. Nagios is just like the SolarWinds or Zabbix. All of these system monitoring tool have basically a footprint on every server. So now, all of a sudden, you can have a vulnerability in the Nagios product, for instance, would open a doorway into other people's servers and all. So it is, it has not yet been rated. So the impact of that has not been rated by the NVD. But based on, our attack metrics, we can see that, it is a very prevalent piece of software. It has a network-based attack vector, and the attack complexity is fairly low. So we have the makings of, a very severe vulnerability out here.
And I guess like SolarWinds, Nagios is widespread and used in many organizations, and kind of, I don't know, people maybe view it as sort of a background tool that should not be intrusive. But a vulnerability is an opening for bad guys.
Absolutely. And, as the report shows, Nagios is a market leader in IT infra monitoring. It's free, so, that makes it a little bit more adoptable, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Has a very, it's like a 20+% market share, and they manage over 5,250 domains. So it's got serious prevalence out there.
Okay.
And this again, this is a OS command injection vulnerability. So our VSP web solution would be perfect candidate to be able to block that particular vulnerability. And our VSP host will make sure that none of these attacks get to run unauthorized software on your endpoint. So the next thing that the attacker does is, after getting access to the OS command in interface, they will start downloading some malware and start triggering those malware and all on the victim server. So all of those will get blocked by our VSP host.
Okay.
The next vulnerability I've picked here is in a platform called PHP Fusion. This has a cross-site request forgery. It's vulnerable to a CSRF attack, which basically means that they're not watching for, if I have a logged in user, I can slip in some requests that do not belong to that particular endpoint. And it allows me to run, potentially deliver really nasty code to, end users as well as on the server. So this is even though the vulnerability score is 4.3, but because I picked it out because of its prevalence.
Okay.
And there is, unfortunately, there is a exploit in the public domain available out here, which makes it really, a big problem essentially.
Right.
So the next vulnerability that I picked out is in the Microsoft Office environment. As you can see here, it goes way back into the Office 2013 time frame essentially, It has a footprint of a CVSS score of 7.8. Full analysis is not yet available, but it ends up, the attacker gets the ability to run remote code essentially on your servers essentially.
So while it doesn't hit a high score on our index, it's still 50%. It's still potentially very dangerous and involving RCE and very widespread.
Exactly. And I picked it out because of the prevalence. Everybody in the in the Fortune 1000 company would be potentially a Microsoft Office user essentially.
Sure.
And it affects your Microsoft Office 365 applications as well. So so those who do not have their own servers in in their own environment would get affected because of the 365 presence of 365 apps in your own setup essentially.
Right. Okay.
And of course, as usual, our Virsec security platform would pick up any remote code execution vulnerability by preventing any unauthorized software from running on your endpoint. So, so there's immediate benefit to deploying VSP on host on our on your servers essentially.
Okay. We have an IBM product and API tool, which again looks like sort of maybe a linchpin product.
Yes. So it basically IBM API allows you to connect, to create and expose, APIs across the clouds essentially. So it kind of is like plumbing that connects, your APIs essentially across different clouds essentially. So it has a very wide, it's the velocity of the attack can be pretty excessive essentially.
So it's interesting, we talk about confused deputies for security products that have vulnerabilities, but some of these, I guess, middleware products, plumbing products also really have a lot of tentacles that can get to many places you might not expect, right?
Absolutely. This is the kind of thing that the bad actors are salivating on, right? Because it suddenly opens up this whole dimension of, how do I get, the biggest, broadest surface available to attack essentially.
Right.
Okay. And again, there are no public exploits available, but, we have the ability to detect all kinds of XSS attacks, cross-site scripting attacks, which is what this particular vulnerability is all about. And so VSP Web in front of this API, IBM Connect API would be able to protect the IBM API, deployments essentially very well.
Okay. And finally, we have our confused deputy of the week.
Exactly.
This is a Fortinet product.
It is, so Forti Deceptor is it's a deception approach that people use to sort of confuse the attacker. It's like a decoy that is placed in front of a typical switch, like an IPS or a firewall essentially. And it is used extensively in the IT/OT infrastructure space and all to sort of throw off the attacker on their game essentially. And so if you have a remote code execution vulnerability in the deception tool, then that doesn't provide very much deception anymore, right? So that's not really a good situation to be in. And so this Deceptor was had a fortunately, there's no public exploit available, but again, because this is a OS command and a remote code execution style vulnerability, the VSP Web and the VSP host would be very well served, to protect, the Forti Deceptor product itself.
All right, Satya, another good list, and we will continue to publish these and develop these. Maybe just some closing thoughts, Satya. I know we talk a lot about remote code execution. We've talked a lot about SolarWinds. We just did another demo yesterday. But any thoughts? This growing awareness, hopefully, of the need to protect during runtime, regardless of what's coming in or what's vulnerable. Do you see more people, understanding that?
Yes, and what's really going on is that the attackers, as we all get smarter and educated about how the attackers are propagating, or based on what tools they what tools they use and leverage, it's becoming more and more obvious that these attacks are happening deep in process memory. So if you do not have eyeballs inside if you do not have an application aware security solution in place protecting your valuable servers that are handling valuable information for you, then you should expect the problem to propagate, because people are now beginning to realize that without having in-memory protection, you kind of opening yourself to serious risk, essentially. So in order to be able to protect you know especially high value servers, it is kind of imperative to use an application aware workload protection solution like what we have here with VSP.
Right, and as we talked about before, stopping these things beforehand is difficult, and systems are porous and guesswork. Unless you have prior knowledge, stopping it afterwards with indicators of compromise usually it takes a long time unless you get lucky or you have prior knowledge. So the need to be minding the store, watching what's really happening with your code, I think is becoming paramount with these new attacks.
Absolutely. We all know in the security industry that visibility is the greatest tool that you really have. And if the attacker is in memory, then it kind of makes sense to have visibility in memory. So as you mentioned earlier, upstream tools like web application firewalls, IPSs and all have very limited visibility inside the process memory. They're really projecting, this is, hey, we've seen this indicator of compromise before. And the last time we saw this indicator of compromise, it led to such and such attack. So they're kind of using past precedent, and as we saw with the SolarWind attack, we saw that the attackers kind of came and manufactured the malware in the SolarWinds infrastructure right there and then. So it's not, it's not the typical, attack that, that would be available all over the place and all, right? The techniques are not known to people. This is why, the SolarWinds attack made, and the absence of any indicator of compromise is the real story behind this scene here. It's really all about a remote code execution as opposed to some sort of a indicator of compromise and machine learning way of, you could not machine learn yourself out of trouble in that scenario.
Right. All right, Satya, we'll leave it at that. And as hopefully the audience knows, we do these reports weekly. You can download our reports. We have blogs on the topic as well. And of course, we have a wide range of webinars and other information. I'll also mention we just are publishing a very detailed end-to-end demonstration of pretty close to how SolarWinds was perpetrated. And we're also always available to do demos like that in person and live. So thank you again, Satya. And thank you to the audience, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Billy.